Hello everyone and welcome back to this new video. Now in this video we are going to explore some different methods on how we can run a Linux operating system in a Windows machine. So do make sure to check out all the ways in which we can run it. Now before we get started, one thing I would like to mention is that for my Linux Masterclass course, if you are a Linux user or a Mac user, then you don't need to watch this video. You can skip it. But if in case you are a Windows user, then you should watch it in order to know how you can run a Linux operating system in a Windows machine. If you are a Mac user, then also you can skip this video, because since Linux and Mac OS are both Unix based, then most of the commands that are there in Linux also work in the Mac's terminal as well, right? So you don't need to have a dedicated Linux machine for that, or a Linux operating system. So again, you can skip this video. But if you are a Windows user, then do make sure to stick around for a while. And without any further ado, let's get started. So there are three ways in which you can run a Linux operating system in a Windows-based machine, right? And the first way to do that is by using WSL, right, which is Windows Subsystem Linux, right, WSL. And the second way to do is by using a VMware or a virtual machine, right, a virtual box in which you can run some distribution of Linux. That is the second way of doing it. And the third way of doing this is by simply booting Linux into your machine, right? So now first let's see how you can get started with WSL. Now I see different students who are there which often complain that my system is not powerful enough to run a virtual machine or a virtual box or VMware, things like that, because those softwares are heavy, right? Because they in a sense are running the entire Linux operating system that is out there. So you might be falling in a scenario where your system is not powerful enough to run a virtual box or a VMware in your Windows, but you still want to get started with Linux. So for those folks, WSL is the best bet. And WSL is a lightweight Linux kind of a thing, which provides you a terminal in which you can run Linux commands, and you can also access some of the GUI based applications that are there for Linux. So if you fall in a category where your system is not you know capable enough to run a virtual machine, then this is what you should go for, WSL. And let's see quickly how we can get started with WSL. So the first thing that we would like to do, to get started with WSL, is we should start with our command line. Just try to open command prompt as an administrator, right? So what I'll do is I'll quickly start my command prompt as an administrator, and here in front of me I can see my command prompt. So WSL has a very simple command line tool which is known as WSL. So I'm simply typing WSL in my screen, and then what I can do is I can just simply write list, and then I can write online, right? So what this does is it sorry, I just entered a space before list, right? So what this does is it gives me a list of all the operating systems, or all the Linux distributions that are available to me that I can use here. And I can see that there are a lot of distributions. I have Ubuntu, I have Debian, I have Kali Linux, and then I have OpenSUSE, and I have different versions of Ubuntu, and I have SLES, which is Linux Enterprise Server, and things like that. So I have all these available to me. And it also says that I can simply do WSL and then hyphen hyphen install and then hyphen D and then write the name of the distro. And this name of the distro is going to be this one, right? So if let's say that I want to install Kali Linux in my system, then what I am going to do is I'm going to type WSL and then I'm going to type install, right? And after install I'm going to do a hyphen D and then I'm going to write Kali Linux as it is written there, right? So this is going to install Kali Linux for me, but I don't want to install Kali Linux. I want to go with Ubuntu. So if I just do WSL and then space and then hyphen hyphen install, by default it is going to install Ubuntu for me, and I want to install Ubuntu, but I can choose any one that is available here in front of me. So by default it installs Ubuntu, and I recommend that you install Ubuntu because I am going to use Ubuntu in the Linux Masterclass, so it is going to be easier for you to follow that. Although all of these operating systems that are there, most of them are going to be bash based, right, and not ZSH based or fish based or some other shell that is there. So all the shells are going to be bash based only, mostly, I think. So that won't be an issue, but still, I mean, it would be you know easier to follow if you just use Ubuntu. If you are, completely new, and later on, I mean, if you are at a beginner stage, then one thing that I generally like to advise is that you should not worry about what distro you should pick or what distribution you should pick. You should just go for whatever you want to go with, because I mean it doesn't matter as at a beginner phase. Later on, when you gain some proficiency with Linux in general, then maybe you can decide, or maybe this distro has this advantage over that one, so I should go with this or I should go with that. Make all those decisions once you are a little bit proficient with Linux as a in general, but initially it doesn't really matter, right? So don't waste your time choosing which distro I should go for, and just go with whatever you want to go with. So I've written WSL hyphen hyphen install, and now I can see that it's kind of installing it for me, right? And it says that it's downloading WSL kernel and things like that. So let it do what it's trying to do, and let's just wait for it to complete. Okay, so it says that it has installed WSL for me, and now it says that the requested operation is successful. Changes will not be effective until the system is rebooted. So I can see in front of my screen that it simply asks me to reboot the system. So let's quickly do that. Now I can see in front of my screen that as soon as I restarted my system, it is installing Ubuntu for me. So I have this command prompt like thing that has opened with the title of Ubuntu, and it says that it's installing and it may take a few minutes, right? So let's just wait for it to get completed, because it has already downloaded all the kernel and things like that that we needed. And we'll be studying about kernel and things like that later on in the Linux Masterclass course, which is a part of the Web Development Bootcamp. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, as we wait, you can feel free to subscribe to the channel, and like this video, and share it with your friends who want to get started with Linux, but are stuck with the Windows machine and are not able to dual boot their system. It's not always necessary. There are a lot of workarounds, right? So you can do that as well. Okay, so one very weird thing that happened with me is that it was kind of stuck on installing. This may take a few minutes, but and it was about 8 minutes since it was going on. So I just pressed and enter, and it kind of just moved forward. So this might happen with you as well. If it does, then make sure that you're pressing the enter key after the interval of every 1 minute per se, so that if it gets stuck just like mine did, then you shouldn't be stuck at it for a very long time. And it says that currently it just asked me to enter a new Unix username. For me it is going to be my name, but you can enter whatever you want. This is going to be the username of your operating system, right? And now it asks me to enter a password, so we are going to quickly enter a password. In Linux, when you type a password, it doesn't shows you anything, right? So that's completely normal. Doesn't mean I have kept the field empty, right? It says that the password is entered, and now it says that I'm logged in into the system, right? And currently my system is Apoorv Goyal @Ayush, and then this. So we'll take a closer look at this. Um, in the first part of the Linux masterclass. But for now, you have your you know Ubuntu installed, and I can check where I am currently. So I am currently in home/Apoorv Goyal. I can check all the things that are there in my home directory. There's nothing here, right? And yeah, I can just you know do whatever I want. I can enter clear and everything gets removed. We'll study about these commands in Linux Masterclass part 1, so don't worry about that. But this was majorly it about having WSL, um, you know as this thing, and it operates just like any normal Linux machine should. And don't worry about it. It might be a little bit different than the regular Linux operating system that you might get when you boot it into the system or when you use a virtual machine. But this does the job. All the commands that are there in Linux would work on this. And more importantly, if your machine is not powerful enough, or to run the virtual machine or the VMware virtual box and things like that, or if you don't want to actually get the GUI of Linux, Ubuntu, or any other distribution, but you just want the command line to practice the Linux commands, or experience how a remote server might be that is based out of Linux, then using WSL is a very good practice for that, right? So with that being said, this was all about WSL. And all these instructions that I just mentioned on installing WSL are also mentioned in the official documentation of Microsoft as well. Here you can see that by WSL install, I can install WSL. If I want to change the distro, I can list it down with these commands. And this is the format of which I need to follow to install some other distribution. And some best practices, and versioning, and how to upgrade and things like that. So you can stay updated about that. Now Linux by default comes with some GUI applications like as well, right? Some GUI applications such as gedit, or gimp, or things like that. So to if you want to run those applications per se, then there's another Microsoft documentation that is there, which is based on running Linux GUI apps on Windows Subsystem for Linux, right? And this guide, extensive guide, would tell you how you can run different things. So if let's say you have a graphic card which is integrated Intel based, then you have to install these drivers. If it is AMD based, you have to install these drivers. For me, I have an Nvidia graphic card in my system right now, so I have to install this for that, right? And then after installing that, and doing this we have already done, installing WSL and things like that, it then comes to running Linux GUI apps, right? So you can then get started with, more or less, I mean, in order to run all these commands, what you have to do is you just have to install it, and then you have to run it like you would do normally. And before doing that, you just have to install the driver of the GPU for that particular um, graphic card that you have in your system. It could be Intel based, AMD based, Nvidia based, doesn't matter. You have to install these drivers, and then you just install whatever you want, whatever GUI based software you want, and just run it as you would normally do, right, in an Ubuntu machine as well. So that was all about running the Linux operating system, or the Linux terminal in a Windows operating system. But now let's talk about the second way of doing it. And the second way of doing it is simple, by using a VMware, or a virtual machine, virtual box, whatever you may call it, right? So for that, we basically need two things. And this approach, this entire approach is applicable to you if you want to experience how the Linux works as a whole, the entire operating system with the CLI as well as the GUI, and all, like the complete end-to-end functionality. If you need that, then you can go with this way. If you are, let's say, unable to dual boot your system, and yeah, I mean, it's basically if your system is able to support a VMware, because it takes certain configurations. It's a good practice to give your VMware about 4 GB of RAM at least, right? And it might occupy some space in the hard disk as well, because when we install WSL per se, then WSL doesn't takes a lot of space in your hard disk, but this will, right? So all these things you have to keep in mind. If you have the hardware to support this, then you can go with the VMware as well, just to experience the entire Linux environment. And a lot of things would be available to you that are not, let's say, available in WSL. Accessing how it is internally, managing all the partitions and storages and things like that. So all of those things are going to be applicable to you, having different users in the system and things like that. So those things are going to be applicable to you. Some things might not work in WSL. I haven't actually really worked with WSL a lot, so it's good to get started with Linux. But in the long term, VMware is any day better than a regular WSL for getting deep inside of Linux. If you want to understand the Linux at a very deeper level, then VMware is your good option, right? So for that, we basically need two things. The first thing is that we need to download the Ubuntu ISO file, the disk image file. So here by default it says Ubuntu 22.04, which is the latest one, right? And the second thing that you need is you need to download the VMware software, right? And VMware also, you can download this one, try workstation 16.0 player for Windows, right? So the link to download Ubuntu and VMware is going to be in the description below, right? But I'm not going to install it, because I download it because I already have it downloaded. So I'm going to close WSL, and here in the desktop I can see the downloads folder. I'll just increase the icon. So this is my Ubuntu disk image and this is my VMware, right? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to install the VMware, right? Now to install the VMware, I just double click on the software and I run it as an administrator. By default it runs as an administrator, and it will take me to its setup suite, right, whatever it is, and ask me for different things. So it just I'll just quickly go through this. So I'll accept the terms of agreement, do next, and let me read through this. No, so we don't want any guard enabled or anything, so you can completely skip this. Now coming to this, so here I mean it just says that eh, there's not going to be any security per se, right? Like credential guard, my system has it by default, but it's not necessary, right? Now we come to this and it says that add VMware workstation console tools in the system path. This you absolutely need, so this is checked by default. And there's a second thing called enhanced keyboard driver. A reboot will be required for to use this feature. This feature requires 10 MB of your host drive, right? So what is this feature? Now when we use Ubuntu, then sometimes we do need the Windows key, right? We do need the Windows key for, let's say, quickly opening the quick search of Ubuntu, or things like that, or any Linux distribution. Any Linux distribution, when you press Windows, it quickly opens the search bar for you, where you can quickly type whatever application you want to open and just press enter, and it will open that application. More like how this type here to search works, right? So that exists for Ubuntu as well, right? And when you're using a VMware, and there when you press the Windows key, sometimes what happens is that the Windows key does not works on the Ubuntu, but actually works on the Windows. And instead of opening the search bar in the Ubuntu, it might be opening this, right, the search of the Windows, right, which we don't want. So if let's say have the VMware opened, then we want the entire keyboard's control to be be the control of the Ubuntu or the VM machine that we are using. So if you're pressing the Windows key, we want the search bar of the Ubuntu to open, right? Or the virtual machine to open. So we are going to check this as well, because we don't want any disturbance when we are in the VMware. And you can choose not to do this, but it's good if you do this. And we're simply going to do next, and check for product updates on startup. Yes, we need that. And join the VMware customer into improvement program. No, I don't want that, right? Because it's going to flood me with a lot of emails and things like that. And it says that it's going to create some shortcuts. I'm fine with that. And then it's just install, right? So now it is installing the VMware into my system, right? And this again might take some time, so let's just wait it out again. And that was quick. It finished the setup, and it says that it wants me to restart the system. So let's restart the system and get back to it. Alright, so the system has restarted right now, and in my desktop I can see a VMware Workstation 16 player. So let's just open this, and this means that the VMware has been installed into the system, and it we want to use it for non-commercial use, right? So we'll just quickly set it up, and now we see the screen where it says, that we are at home currently here, and we can create a new virtual machine, open an existing one, upgrade to the pro version which we don't want, and help, right? So the first thing that we want to do is, we don't have any virtual machine right now, right? So we are going to create a new virtual machine, right? If we already, let's say, had a virtual machine, then we could have certainly just opened it, but since we don't have anything right now, we'll just create a new virtual machine. And in as soon as we click on it, we see this pop-up where it asks us for the installer disk image or the ISO file, right? The ISO file for me is in the desktop in the downloads as Ubuntu 22.04 ISO, right? And I don't want to install the operating system later, right? I want it to install right now, right? And then again, I'm going to give it some name. My full name is Apoorv and then Goyal. My username is going to be Apoorv TWTS, which is my Twitter handle, right? And my password is going to be something, right? And I'm going to do next, right? And now I can give the name of the machine. By default it is Ubuntu 64-bit, because that is the ISO file that I selected, but I'm kind of fine with that, right? So don't have to change that. Actually can set a different location for my virtual machine, but don't want to do that either, right? I'll do next. I can assign, the disk space to my Ubuntu virtual machine, whatever space I want to. By default it says 20, and it says that the recommended size or the minimum size, you can say, is 20 GB. You can obviously increase it to 50, 100, whatever you want to allocate to the Ubuntu operating system that you're going to have. But just note that whatever size you allocate, there's going to be some space that is going to be occupied by the operating system as well. So it's good if you allocate at least 50 to 100 GB to this at least, right? So do that, and store it in a single file. So we're going to do that. We are going to change the hardware from here, like I can simply click on customize hardware here, and certainly set whatever I want to do. So according to my system, it says that the recommended memory is 4 GB, right? And since my maximum memory in my system is 16 GB at this moment, then it says that out of 16 GB, 4 GB is going to be ideal for. But I can allocate as much as I want. I can allocate 8 GB to my operating virtual machine or anything like that. I can change the number of processors that I want, for this virtual machine. I can, basically change all these settings, the network adapter and the USB controller, what I want. I can say that USB compatibility is going to be 3.1, which is going to adversely affect the speed of any USB connected. I can select the sound card, printer, display, whatever I want, right? So I can change all these settings, and then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to click on finish, right? So as soon as I click on finish, what it does, it's trying to set up the thing for me, and it just tells me that I'm doing some side channel mitigations are enabled, and it is going to enhance the security but lower the performance. Doesn't matter right now. And don't show this hint again. Okay, right. And now what it's going to do is it's going to set up my machine for me. Right, so it is going to set up the machine for me, and it is going to install the Ubuntu operating system into my machine. Right, so currently it's setting up the machine, and now it is installing the Ubuntu operating system inside of that virtual machine that I just created. So it might again take some time, not sure how much, but it's going to take some time for sure. We just saw the Ubuntu prompt, which means that the Ubuntu has been initialized, and now it might take us to the Ubuntu setup. Yeah, so now it's installing the Ubuntu, setting up the Ubuntu, and we can select the language. English it is for me. I'm going to do normal installation, which is going to come with web browser, utilities, office software, games and media players. I don't actually need the games and media players, but I mean, why not, right? But you can do minimal installation, it's up to you. Normal installation is what is recommended. Download updates while installing Ubuntu is something that you should have. It was checked by default, so don't change this. And don't need third party softwares as of now. So we're gonna continue with this without changing a bit about it. Now again with the settings that we've just provided. So it says that erase disk and install Ubuntu. That's exactly what we want, because we allocated 20 GB dedicated to this VM virtual machine, right? And now what we are going to do is we are going to simply install, Ubuntu inside of it. So this was the partition that we created. Our time zone is Kolkata, doesn't matter. I'm gonna continue. It is asking me again with the petty details. My name is Apoorv Goyal. My computer's name is going to be my Twitter handle, Apoorv TWTS. Right. My username is going to be my Twitter handle, and don't, or you could ask me for my password. Doesn't matter. And now we can see that it's copying some operating system files into my operating system inside of the virtual machine. So it might take a couple of minutes. Let's wait it out again. Okay, so it looks like the installation is about to complete here. uh, the bar is almost filled, and yeah, it says that the installation is completed and restart now. So you can simply click on restart now, and it's going to restart the virtual machine for us. Again it is restarting, occupying 4 GB RAM out of my system. And as the Ubuntu has been initialized, it shows me my username. I can enter the password that I entered previously, uh, while setting up my Ubuntu. And here I can see that stuff has loaded for me. So don't want to do this, and don't send system info, and location services, don't want them to be enabled. Depends on personal preference, don't want any software. And you can see that the Ubuntu is now set up onto my device, and I can simply just go full screen by clicking on this button, right? So this is like not full screen, and this is full screen, and it would work exactly as Ubuntu should. And just because I had that keyboard drivers installed, while doing the thing, if I press the Windows key, I can see that the search bar is opening up for me, right? So I press Windows, I type terminal here, and I can quickly just access the terminal that is there, right? So that's how simple it is to install a virtual machine, right? I will close the virtual machine now, and remind me later for the update. And it's better to just power off the virtual machine first before closing the VMware, right? Or you might end up losing your data, right? So this is closed, and now this is closed, and that was all about installing a VMware and Ubuntu operating system inside of the VMware in Windows. Right. Now, you may ask that, Apoorv, what if I want to install some other distribution of Linux? Well, the concept remains same. I mean, you are again going to install the VMware software, and then inside of VMware, you are, again going to install, uh, download whatever distribution you want to. You're going to download the ISO file of that. You are going to create a virtual machine in a very similar manner, giving it some hardware and setting up some, functional, like some settings about it, and then it's going to install just like Ubuntu installed, and then you are going to start using it just like I started using Ubuntu, right? So this was the second way of running Linux in your Windows machine. First was WSL, which was not applicable if you don't have a good hardware and if you don't want to explore, the GUI element of Ubuntu and you just want to access the command line. So that was there for WSL. For VMware and virtual machine, you'll have a complete functionality, but you need a better hardware. At least 4 GB RAM is something that I would recommend. You should allocate, and that you can do only if you have 8 GB RAM in your system. Because if 4 GB is going to be consumed by VMware, then the Windows running in the behind also needs some RAM to run, right? So with 8 GB RAM, I think you're good to go with that, and that was it for this. And the third way is this, right? So I'm not going to get into the detail of how to do this, but let's say that you want, you don't want to use VMware, and you also don't want to use WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, but you actually wanted to boot it, and you for some reason were unable to dual boot your system, right? And it's a complicated procedure. I mean, no one is blaming you if you were not able to dual boot your system, right? It takes some real struggle sometimes to dual boot the system. I myself struggled a bit when I tried doing it after so many years. I currently have Ubuntu dual booted into my system, so I'm probably going to uninstall the VMware and the WSL. But if you, let's say, wanted it that way, then one more way that you can do it is to, it could be due to any reason. Maybe you're not able to create a partition. In my case, I have two different SSDs connected to my motherboard, right? So one SSD is completely running Windows and one SSD is completely running Ubuntu. So that why it wasn't as complicated as, creating different partitions in a single hard disk or SSD or memory and then trying to dual booting it. It wasn't, complicated in that sense for me. But you might be facing those issues that your Windows is occupying the entire space in your device, and you're not able to create some free space for, like, after which you're going to create a partition for Ubuntu, right? You might be getting stuck with that, or you might be having some other complications that okay, I installed, both Windows and Ubuntu, but by default Windows is opening up, or by default Ubuntu is opening up, and I cannot access back to, the previous one. If by the way, if you're going through that, then just simply switch to grub menu, the grub bootloader. It is going to show you a prompt through which you can decide if you want to open Ubuntu or Windows. Sometimes it doesn't get configured the right way, but just try around a little bit, try to, search through internet what might be the issue. There are different issues different times. So but in case, I mean, you want to, let's say, not go with dual boot but still want to, not use VMware or WSL, things like that, then what you can do is you can use an external USB drive to make an actual portable Linux system on USB, right? So how it works is that you have one USB, let's say with the 4 GB RAM or 4 GB space or 8 GB space. You have one 8 GB USB stick, and that USB stick is what you make Linux bootable, right? You use, let's say, the Rufus software or something like that, and it is all mentioned in this blog here. So if I scroll down a little bit, it tells you, how you can do these certain things. So it says that you need two USBs, 4 GB USB, for booting the pen drive, and 32 GB, a minimum of 32 GB USB for installing that operating system into that pen drive, right? So instead of installing it in the hard disk or the SSD, you would be installing it directly in another pen drive, right? And that pen drive you can connect with any system, maybe your laptop or your desktop, whatever you want to. You can connect it with any system and simply just use Linux by through that pen drive, right? So that also you can do. You'll need two pen drives. One pen drive is going to be to make the Linux bootable, and the second pen drive is going to be the one in which the operating system is going to get installed, right? And this pen drive, I usually recommend that it should be at least 64 GB or 128 GB. And it's a very good way of doing things, because back in the days when I was working with multiple operating systems, I triple booted my system, not dual booted, but triple booted my system. I was running Ubuntu and Windows and Arch Linux. I was running these three operating systems at once. But later on, I also wanted to try out some other distributions as well. So after triple booting already, it wasn't making sense to me to add one more operating system into my device. So I took some pen drives and installed different operating systems. So I had one pen drive in which I installed Kali Linux, and I had one pen drive in which I installed CentOS. So I installed all these operating systems, and whenever I wanted to use those operating systems, I simply just plugged in that USB and just ran the operating system through that. So it's that simple. You don't have to overcomplicate things. This blog, the link of this blog is going to be in the description below. You can simply refer to this blog to see how you can also achieve similar kind of a thing. All you would need is two pen drives and one system in which you're going to do all of this. And it's also going to show you how you can create the bootable pen drives and things like that using softwares. So this one uses Etcher, which is again a good software. I usually use Rufus, right? You can go with any one of them. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. So to conclude it, WSL can be used if your system is not, in terms of hardware, it's not as sound as it should be to actually run a virtual machine and VMware software. So, and if you generally just want the command line but not the actual the GUI and everything that comes with a Linux operating system, so you can go with WSL in that case. Dual boot is the best option, obviously, and if not, then I am saying that you can go with WSL. And if you let's say have the hardware to support a virtual machine and VMware, then go with that, because that I think is the best option if you're not able to dual boot your system. And the third thing is that even if you're wanting to dual boot or things like that, then also this might be a sound option for a lot of people, right? To actually use a USB drive in which operating system is installed, right? So that was it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one, right? Till then, have a nice day.